Kris Robertson, please tell us where you were born and raised.
So I was actually born in Scarborough, Ontario. I grew up in Pickering, Ontario, for the entirety of my life before going to school in Montreal.
Okay, so Kris, I think you and I are going to have a tremendous conversation here today on the topic of physical training for football. But before we get there, I do want to hear more about your story, Kris, because I think you got a very, very cool story. And I think, if I may be so bold, your story kind of illustrates a broader idea of what it means to quote unquote make it in football. So I'll start the story. Just Kris is not just an athlete, but drafted into the CFL. Nowadays, working in the CFL for the Toronto Argonauts. I'll turn it over to you, Kris, to try to finish off that story of tell us how you got to where you are today.
So my story kind of starts back in university. Um, After I finished my first year of university, I needed a job in the summer, kind of like every college kid, and I needed something that was going to allow me to make enough money, but be able to maintain my training schedule, which is pretty vigorous. And that's when my dad kind of recommended to me. He goes, "Why don't you try personal training?" And I was just like, "You know what? Let me let me try that." And from there, it started training people like outdoors on a hill, and then I started, charging like $10 per client. Word of mouth, things started to spread. I got more clients, and I was able to charge more. But essentially, what happened was it allowed me to not work, a full 8-hour day, still make decent enough money that I could support myself, support my training. And from there, I did that for about 3-4 years. And then I ended up getting drafted into the CFL by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, 11th overall, in the 2013 CFL draft. And then unfortunately after that, I actually injured my knee. So I ended up getting ACL, LCL, and posterolateral corner. So I ended up going back to school. I did my 5th year. From there, I got signed by Saskatchewan, but then I was released rather shortly. And I started training for a little bit after that. And then I kind of had a decision. I was 25 at the time. And I go, do I kind of want to start a career, or do I want to continue chasing football? So I still continue to stay in shape. But then opportunities started to come, right? So I got an opportunity to work as a fitness supervisor at George Brown. George Brown's a college here in Toronto. From there, I went to an internship with the Toronto Argonauts, where I'm at now in 2016. I made really good connections there. And what ended up happening was that my boss from the Toronto Argonauts left for Rugby Canada. And then about a year later, an opportunity opened up for me. He said, "Hey, I got an opportunity. It's going to be in Toronto." I said, "Hey, I'm your guy." So I did that for 4 years. I learned a lot. I had a lot of great mentors. Being around Olympians, being around a high performance environment, really showed me um, what it takes to kind of be in this profession. So from there, I became a little bit more of a generalist. So I started learning about becoming more well rounded about a holistic approach to athlete development. From there, I got an opportunity to go move out to BC. So I went to BC for 2 years, where I was working as the head of strength and conditioning at Simon Fraser University. It's the only D2 school in Canada. From there, I was able to learn a lot more about like my management style, how I work with a variety of different sports, and essentially just how to be a better coach. So we ended up moving back here. I worked in a private practice for a bit. And then another opportunity to come back to the Argos came up in 2024, and I took it and ran with it as a sports scientist, which was going to help broaden out my career. And then from there, I got an opportunity to now work with the Raptors 905. So it's the Toronto Raptors of the NBA. They're a G League affiliate. And I've kind of been going back and forth between Argos and 905. And all through all this, my business has moved online. So I have online clients, I do mentorships, I run courses, and that's kind of where my things have evolved for me. and I have some good things that are going to be coming on the horizon in the next 12 to 24 months.
Fantastic story. And I guess, Kris, just if I could put a bow on it, look, here was the point I was getting at to begin with. You were probably like I was, like many, let's say, 11 to 12-year-old boys are. If you grabbed an 11 to 12-year-old boy and say, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? The young football player would say, I want to be the winning quarterback in the Super Bowl. The odds of that, the odds of making it pro in football or any sport, Kris, are. So the reason why I love your story is I really see it as a way to, again, quote unquote, make it in football. You're working in the game, you're doing stuff you love, and I think your story is fantastic. I'm very, very happy you could share your insights with us here this morning. So speaking of your insights, Kris, how about if we do this for a format today as we talk about physical conditioning for football? Let's just do two broad categories, eh? And we'll have a discussion, you and I, in a very, very fundamental nuts and bolts kind of a way. We'll talk about the first category of young football players. Let's, for argument's sake, say high school football players, trying to be as good players as they can possibly be. And then, because it's all very, very fascinating to hear about your insights at the pro level and maybe some differences in physical training on those two levels. All right, let's get started talking about a topic very, very near and dear to my heart, physical training for kids. If you are a kid in grade 9 and you're starting high school and you want to be the best football player you can possibly be, what kind of considerations in terms of a program should a high school football athlete be thinking about?
At the high school level, it adjusts a little bit. You get a little bit more specialized. But when we're talking about, you said 9, for example, like 9-year-old football player, it's
Okay.
about being a well-rounded athlete. I don't think, in my opinion, with the exception of like early specialization sports such as like gymnastics, swimming, that just comes to the top of my mind, where specializing them is kind of almost needed from the standpoint of just because the peak is really early. So, like gymnastics, for example, you don't really see many 30-year-olds
No,
running down, doing flips and stuff like that. It's
no.
all young high school people. So, like early specialization makes sense. But with uh, older athletes, when you get into high school, that's when the specialization you can start to increase it, in my opinion, just a little bit more. Still focusing on being a well-rounded athlete, but this is where I think like physical literacy, from the standpoint of lifting weights, learning to move, all these different things that you were doing as a kid, you just become a little bit. It just becomes a little bit more intensive.
All right, so let's talk about the weights, strictly weight training. When's good? When would you recommend starting that?
Um, so don't think of it as weights and think of it as resistance training.
Right.
Okay. So when I think of resistance training, I think of barbell work. I'm thinking of jumps, hops, skips, all these different things. You can always do those. So, for example, I have my 9-year-old, sorry, my 8-year-old daughter, and what we do is she'll do pistol squats. I get her to go to we go to the park. She does monkey bars, right? That's all forms of resistance
For sure it
training.
is.
It's just not, when people think of resistance training, they're thinking of, oh, you're going to put 400 pounds on my back and we're going to squat and we're going to progressively overload that way. No, there's different ways that you can do that. By jumps, hops, coordination things, uh, just general calisthenics. So I do pistol squats, we'll do bridges. Um, my son, he's in jiu-jitsu. They do forms of resistance training. They push each other around. If a kid weighs 50 pounds
Hmm.
and he's pushing or she's pushing against you and you're pushing against them, that's a form of resistance training. It's just not traditional in the sense of like barbells and things like that. But I think I always used to say to parents is like, you will let your kid jump off of the slide and land on the ground, which is going to be 17 to 20x their body weight, but you think that doing a goblet squat is going to be bad.
The
You got to
mathematics
understand
don't add up.
the math ain't mathing, as a young kid say.
Mm. All right, so that's a good point, Kris. The broad idea that it's resistance training. not necessarily weight training. Let's talk about if we can just come up with, just for fun, let's talk about
Hmm.
like program development. A kid starting grade 9 on the football team, I understand what you're saying about resistance training. It's not weights, but would you recommend that kid undertake a weight training program? He's in the gym doing weights.
Yeah, 100%. In my mind, I would say grade nine's a pretty safe time to be working on a quote unquote traditional weight training program. You can start earlier, but I think from a um, maturity standpoint, in terms of the kid understanding what it is important because you got to be smart in the weight room. Like you could really hurt yourself, so there has to be a maturity aspect to it and understanding like what we're doing and why we're doing it. So I always look at grade nine. I've worked with kids as young as grade eight, but again, just some of these kids are just a little bit more mature. So it's nothing to do with their, necessarily their physical abilities. It's more so to do with, I think, with like their mental acuity and things like that.
100%. I'm sorry to say I see that because that's my son's in grade 10 now. And at the
Mm.
risk of ratting out my son, Chris, him and his buddies, man, they go to the gym and I don't know if it's testosterone when you're 14 years old. What do they do? How much can you deadlift? And they're smart young boys. But all right, so let's say a grade 9 is going to be starting. I've never lifted weights, but I want to be on the football team this year. Let's talk about the details broadly of a program you might think is not a bad idea. And we're talking like days per week. If we can structure like whatever you think, kind of a split would be best. What do you
So
think?
I would say 2 to 3 days a week. I would recommend total body because when you're starting out to lift, it's more of a neural adaptation. So in terms of you're actually learning the movements. So there's people who are on traditional splits of like upper body, lower body, for example. But when you do those things, you don't get back to those basic compound movements. Like for example, let's use a bench press. If you're on an upper lower split, you may only bench, maybe once in a week. So now when a kid's trying to actually learn the skill of something, they're only doing it once a week. Who's going to have a better advantage? The kid who does it twice a week or the kid that does it once a week?
Yeah,
The kid who does it twice a week, right?
yeah.
So you have to look at it from when a kid's learning to lift, it is it's all literally about motor control, right? And motor learning. So learning the movements, that is the first probably 3 months of a resistance training program, right? Maybe
So
3 to 6, depending on how often you're going. So again, 2 to 3 days a week, total body, um, while playing other sports, because that's how you're going to get really strong. So for example, when I was working with my youth athletes, we did 2 days a week, 2 days a week, and I had my rugby girls by the time a year or two came, they were squatting, 1.5 times their body weight with ease. They got very, very strong, but what they were doing is they're resistance training, they're learning the movements, but guess what? We're playing rugby now. They're able to apply the strength that they're learning in the gym to the field, to the pitch. And that is where you get a really good symbiotic relationship. Now, if a kid is not playing any sports, I would recommend 3 days a week at a minimum. If you're doing absolutely nothing,
mhm.
right, which I don't recommend, but for whatever circumstances may be, location, money, whatever it may be, minimum 3 days a week if you're not doing anything. If you are busy, you're in multiple sports, 2 days a week is all you need. Because at the end of the day, you have to look at it is everything that we do, it gives us stress, and stress now is like a cup, and when you put things into this cup, it fills up. But if you keep adding too much, now when things spill over, this is where injury, illness, and bad things can possibly happen. So again, 2 times a week if you're playing multiple sports, 3 days a week if you're doing nothing.
Hmm. Do you have a thought one way or the other? The types of exercises you mentioned, compound exercises, machines. Do they all fit? Do you have a preference? What would you say about that?
So in my opinion, I would stick to when I think compound exercise. Just think of four basic movements. When I think of a hinge, right? So this is like a bending up at the hips, so like a Romanian deadlift. You have a squat, something that has requires knee flexion extension, right? You have upper push. So again, you have horizontal push. So think of laying on your back and doing a horizontal push. You have vertical push. Your torso is upright and you're pressing above your head, right? And then you have your vertical pull and your horizontal pull. So think of horizontal pull as you're laying on your stomach and you're pulling a weight towards your chest, and then you have a vertical pull, which is going to be doing something where you're in a hanging variation and you're pulling your body up. So think of like a chin up, for example. So those moving categories are a really good place to start, right? Then you start adding in other variations such as your single leg activities, so like your lunges, your pistol squats, things like that. Then you start adding in rotational exercises, so things that have to do with like med balls and things like that. So you want to have that in terms of as a well-rounded program, 2 to 3 days a week.
My next question. I was going to ask you to get talk about sets and reps.
Yeah, so I would say for your main exercises, so think of those compounds that we talked about, right? So you have your squat, your hinge, your upper push, your upper pull. So those four basic categories. I would do anywhere between 3 to 4 sets, 6 to 8 reps. Accessory exercises, so you have single joint exercises, so tricep exercises, you have again shoulder exercises, you'll have lunges, things like that. I would stick in again from a 6 to 10 rep range, anywhere from 2 to 3 sets.
Fantastic. Kris, talking about reps, that got me thinking of not the infamous 1 rep max. And not that these kids are going to be doing 1 rep maxes, but here's where my mind went with that. There is a component of football, perhaps more so than in other sports, where weight room numbers hold more value than in many sports. Would you agree with that, first of all? Talk about how much the metrics that are often used off the field, like the combine, for example, how much does that translate into the actual worth of a football player?
So, in my opinion, you'll learn of a general athlete's output. So, lower body strength, lower body power, their speed, their muscular endurance, the 225 test. Um, but I would say there's more so segments. So, for example, when I look at the 0 to 10 yards, I'm looking at like my D linemen. That's going to be probably very important for them. Their ability to broad jump and vertical jump, that's going to be important because the positions in which they play, and they have to explode off of that line every single time, every single play. Speed, I don't think necessarily for a quarterback is that important, but you just have to be, there's a certain level of speed you have to be. For offensive linemen, a 40 yard, does it translate? It tells you that this person is very strong because to be fast, you have to be strong. They're probably a good athlete. But again, um, for me, I think there is just a certain speed for a wide receiver that just gets you into the club. Just because you run a 4.2 doesn't mean you're going to be the best receiver.
Hmm.
But guess what? If you run a 4.8 in today's game, you'll probably have trouble.
Hmm.
So 4.5, if you run a 4.5 as a receiver, hey, you know what? We can work with that. What's your size? So when it comes to sport in general, so I'm going to get back to the combine, but there's 4 S's in which I believe are important. Okay, you have the size of an athlete, the skill level of an athlete, the speed of an athlete, and the smarts of an athlete. For my rule of thumb, 404 is the freak athlete. Those are the anomalies, the ones that you're like, okay, right? I think of in basketball, LeBron James. It's just those are one of one, and they
Hmm.
come along every so often. Those are the
Sure.
unicorns, right? Most professional athletes fit into that 3 or 4 category. If you have 3 or 4 of them, you have a good chance. 2 or 4, you better work your ass off. 1 or 4, I tell people, hey man, maybe recreational sports is best for you.
Kris, that is,
That's such a good
I
way.
think in all my years, that's the best way to explain that I've ever heard.
Yeah.
The four, and I love
Like,
your honesty, by the way, because we got to be realistic. There's a bar to entry, I think, to play football
mhm,
at the highest level, especially,
mhm,
and again, as you very rightly, you broke it down to positions when I asked you the question about the combine. Football's too broad a game to generalize. You went into specifics of positions, and you say you better have these numbers if you're going to do this. So, folks, the four S's, and I love how you quantify the 4 out of 4 is the rare physical human specimen that you're hardly ever going to find. And contrary to that, if you happen to be the cards were dealt to you that you're only 1 out of 4, then Kris, maybe what you do is you try to make it in the sport in some other way. Maybe you become a registered dietitian, like me, because I was certainly not a 4 out of 4 athlete. Fantastic. I love that. I love that.
but it's also with him saying that too. It's actually a really good way to just assess yourself, but as well to assess your kid, right? If you're working with you, that like, listen, okay, I know when it comes to size, I look at there's height and there's a weight requirement. So it's not very, it's kind of taboo, but people talk about BMI and how it doesn't really tell you what you need to tell, but BMI is a good indicator because when you have positional groups, they're going to be very, very similar BMI regardless of their height.
100%.
And that's one thing that I found when I've actually started to break down the sports. So I looked at women's basketball, I looked at football, and I looked at each position group. I have each position group kind of broken down at the combine, and it's just like the average and standard deviation is pretty tight
Yeah.
in terms of their BMI. So it's just like, okay, if I'm not 6 foot, maybe I need to put on some size. But if I put on size, does that sacrifice my speed? Okay, so how do I get faster? How do I get bigger? So this is going back to how you're talking about the weight room and how that matters because those things do translate to a degree.
Hmm.
And I know this is a question you're probably going to ask later, but with regards to how it develops is, we have high school, college, just get strong and powerful at those raw numbers. I want to see you squat as much as you can, jump as high as you can, run as fast as you can. At the pros, it's taking your raw abilities, refining it, and now working on the smarts and the skill. So again, the speed, the change of direction, the forces of these athletes that they're putting into the ground, these are elite of the elite. But what you're also working on at the same time is age. They're getting older. So what happens as you age? You're not able to do, the numbers you could do back in college. That's
Hmm.
fine.
Hmm.
You're still above the minimum standard threshold of what we need in terms of strength, power, and speed. It's now refining your skill and your smarts. So this is where the film study comes in, right? And the stuff that we do in the gym compared to the pros, I'm not putting 400-pound guys back. Our skill guys, they're working more so on unilateral strength, what we call tissue qualities, making sure that they're robust enough to withstand the forces. Because you have guys that are running 10 meters a second, high nines, like every single day at practice. The forces that they're using, they're putting into the ground,
Incredible.
it's greater than any high school college kid would do. And on top of that, they're older. So you have a 30-year-old running around at 10 meters a second. Hey man, that takes a toll on your body. Your recovery takes a little bit longer. So the stuff you have to do in terms of to make sure that their cup, going back to the cup analogy, doesn't overfill, is you have to minimize what you're doing in the gym. So you're doing less stressful things in the gym, right? and you're working more on the tissue qualities, movement abilities, right, of their bodies to keep them upright.
Yeah, yeah.
And they still continue to get faster because now you're working on things that they're not doing.
So we've kind of segued into talking about the professional game, and you mentioned some great points there. A main focus, Kris, being keeping the guys upright,
Mhm.
and considering, which is also a really unique way to look at it, I think, the notion that when they're at that level, they're such physical specimens per given workout, the degree of whatever word you want to use it, force, stress, trauma, they inflict upon themselves because they've created this amazing physical machine is so high. You gotta let these dudes rest, man. It's not like a kid high school who doesn't know exactly what he's doing and he's running and his technique is wonky and oh, I can do this again tomorrow. Yeah, but that's because you produced like this much of the, I'll use the word again, trauma, that this physical specimen. You want me to produce some work? Okay, you watch what happens here. It's an incredible amount. So they got to recover from that, and that's a big consideration at the pro level, right?
So it's interesting. I found this in doing a few years ago. I was working simultaneously. I was working with high school athletes and I was working with my professional athletes. Okay, and what I was doing was like an off season, so I was actually giving them like pretty much the same program. And then I started to look at, okay, how long does it take these guys to recover? How long does it take these athletes to recover, my younger athletes? And what I was finding is it was taking, for the same workout, it was taking a little bit longer for them to recover when you look at relative loads. So, for example, you have someone that squats, let's just do really simple math. Someone squats 100 pounds, let's use 100 kilos so we don't sound bad. So, 100 kilos and 200 kilos, okay? At 80% of their respective lifts, you have one that's lifting 80 kilos and one that's lifting 160 kilos, okay? They're both 80%, but one is just more mass. And the body is the body. And what was happening was once you get over that like 120 kilo squat, if we were using like single leg squats, for example, I was finding that it was taking them longer to recover. The damage that was inflicted upon them, the trauma, as you said, was to a greater degree. And that's when it really like showed me, okay, just because it's 80% is not, these are not relative. This
Mm.
is, this is, there's a difference here.
Yeah, yeah.
So my rep scheme started to change. My sets, right? My programming started to change based off of what I was trying to get done. So you have to be a little bit smarter in terms of how you organize things. With a younger athlete, I can give you a 3 day a week barbell program and you'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
With my professional athletes, you have to break things up. This is where, upper lower splits come. This is where, okay, we're doing total body this day. We're going to do more of like a core and sling work on another day as a recovery day. And the third day, we can get it lifted. Or we have to say, okay, we're going to do strength one day, core one day, and more power based work the other days to do so that the stress drops. Whereas with a young athlete, I'm doing 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm doing strength work. And they're recovering just fine.
Yeah. So interesting. Let's keep talking about. We use the word trauma again, and I want to hear how you work this in. The game of football itself, Kris, as I think you're well aware, can be a traumatic event, and this is why they only play one game a week, 18 games a year, in the CFL. My question is, once the season starts, what does off-field conditioning look like within the context of the CFL season? Keeping in mind you have that one day a week where you have to inflict the game of football upon yourself.
So essentially, how it works is day one, day two, day three are practice days. Day four is going to be a walkthrough day. Day five is essentially his game day. Day six, the day after the game, is rundown. Okay. In terms of how they do things, the practice is the practice. Coaches manage practices very well in terms of on day one, it's a moderate day. Day two is a little bit harder. Day three is the hardest, and you kind of recover, right? So it kind of crescendos that way, and you get a little decrease. So it's a natural peak. You peak, decrease. Okay. In terms of the off-field work now, you're fitting in anywhere from 2 to 3 days a week of lifting, depending on how long the week is. Now, a lot of what it is in terms of for guys is movement quality. So working, making sure that their joints are mobilized and moving well, right? Making sure their hips, their knees, ankles, all that are in shoulders, right? Trunk stability. Um, what people would argue is the little muscles. You hear a lot of people, "Oh, I need to work on the little muscles or something like that," right? And it's really about that. Compound lifts obviously do happen, but again, it's a very small part of what the program is. You're more so working on, again, movement quality, tissue quality, right? Because of the speeds. These guys are running hard at practice. They're jumping, running, cutting, catching, right? So in terms of stress, there's a lot of stress happening there. The weight room secondary, and that's how people need to think. Whereas when you're younger, the weight room's kind of there, very important compared to practice. It's like one and one. Whereas now it's like we're taking a step back and we're really trying to focus on making sure that we're supplementing and improving your ability to move, that your tissues are healthy, right? And that you feel good.
Really interesting. So you're talking about the purposes here of uh, resistance training, off-field training during the season. I do want to talk about a big topic in football, the whole issue, Kris, of body composition. The manipulation of body composition probably is not a main goal, let's say, during the season. I'm thinking that's more of an off-season endeavor for a pro football player. But what I'd like you to speak about is just the whole concept of body composition manipulation in football. What does that mean to you at the professional level?
Body composition is very important.
How do you guys measure it, by the way? There's lots
So
of different ways of measuring.
that's the thing is that we don't do that here.
Okay.
That would require a little bit more staff to be able to do that.
Yep.
Quite frankly, is for our speed guys, fat doesn't fly. It sounds really crude, but it's just the fact of how things work. And so we're constantly working on. You don't actually really have to work. It's just they understand their diet, right? And it's we're able to provide supplements through the CFLPA. Supplements we're able to provide, so it's just giving them education on these things. I'm not a dietitian, but I can tell you the benefits of taking creatine and why do you want to take protein shakes, things like that, and then understanding in terms of protein intake, the importance of it, carbohydrates to fuel your brain, your body for energy, for practice, and things like that. So I would say they're good in that sense. With body composition, I did more of it actually at Rugby Canada. So I actually got Isaac certified level 1. So I was able to do like skin folds and things like that. And basically what we found is, when our athletes were at a certain skin fold number, below a certain skin fold number, we would see everyone with PR in terms of like their speed. So that's kind of how we used it. We used it as well with regards to developing nutrition habits, because everything we did was about teaching athletes about to be a professional. So it was like a lot of education, whereas once you get here, the education is very minimal compared to working in the youth space. When I'm working with the Raptors, they do skin folds. It's really big in the NBA, so we have a dietitian that does all, and she does a really good job of educating athletes, helping us, and like us working together to make sure that numbers in terms of weight numbers and what we're seeing from the nutrition side.
Let me ask you one more tool that I think you guys do use. Fancier stuff that you guys have at your level. The GPS? And what's the main metric, Kris, you get by using that?
So it gives you so many metrics. So you can get accelerations, deceleration count. You can get, the speed of an acceleration, the speed of a deceleration. You're able to get, top speed in terms of how fast they're running. You're able to get, there's something called HSR, which is high speed running. So again, once you get over a certain speed, that counts as high speed running. So we count that in terms of like a stress number. So again, you want to keep those numbers week to week. You want to keep them, between like 80 and 150% of each other. So if you did 100 HSR one week, you kind of want to stay between 80 and 150 HSR. If you go above or below that, if you go below that, there's a chance of risk of detraining. So you got to think of athletes need to get top ups. If you're going above that, you got to start adding in some recovery, okay, to make sure that we're decreasing the chance of that cut being overfilled. We're looking at top speed in terms of how fast you're running, and every week you want to have at least 1 to 2 exposures of 80. We use 88% of their top speed. What this does is just think of the sprinting. Think of it as a vaccine for injury risk. Again, so the more, if you get an appropriate number of exposures at that speed, your body, gets acclimated to that, so that when it does get into that in a game, you're not shocked. Like, oh shoot, I haven't been here before. So just think of it as practice. You're just practicing it. Now, like anything, if you go above it, there's a risk of injury. If you go below it, there's a risk of injury. Even if you stay at the sweet spot, there's a risk of injury. But what we do know is that 1 to 2 exposures a week gives you a good indication of things else, right?
Very interesting. Kris, the whole thing is interesting. Your story is interesting. And look, I greatly appreciate your time. We began, Kris, here this morning talking about the whole notion of making it in football. And before you get back to your day job there as being the sports scientist of the Toronto Argonauts, I want to very quickly tell us one last story to illustrate the idea of making it in football. Kris, tell us your experience, 2024 Grey Cup.
That was it was really fun. Um, it was actually my second Grey Cup, so I actually won in 2017 as well when I was here, and then again in 2024. And winning is something I was never able to win as a player. So even when I was at, high school level, I always get to the final and we lose. So I have a few times where we lost in the championship, and that hurts. So being able to be on this side of things and seeing the sport from a different perspective was obviously fun. It was interesting, right? And for me, it's what gets my blood going in terms of being in a stressful situation. And stress is not like don't think of it in a negative connotation. I'm thinking of a standpoint of every day when you're in pro sport, you're like, okay, what am I doing? Am I doing my job to make sure that we're able to win, right? And that's going to be making sure I'm looking at the numbers, making sure guys are staying healthy, these different things, working in conjunction with our medical team, strength condition, all these different things. So again, to experience that on the other side of not being a player was absolutely amazing and something that I'll never ever forget. And the feeling of going to practice every day and how things feel, it it is truly an experience, and I'm very blessed to say that I got to experience that.
Pretty cool, man. Pretty cool. All right, so Kris, again, unbelievable stuff. We could go on and on all day, I think. But for the time you gave me here this morning, my most sincere thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
And I'll sign off like I always do by saying, let's go Canada. Support Canadian athletes.